Thank you all for joining us today for an important conversation about a game-changing bill that was signed into law by President Biden on March 11th, just about 2 months ago, the American Rescue Plan. My name is Graham Trainer, and I'm proud to serve as president of the Oregon AFL-CIO, the statewide Federation of Labor Unions, and I use he, him pronouns. We know that working people have been keeping the economy running throughout the pandemic despite incredible odds. We got sick, we lost loved ones, we lost jobs in our healthcare, and oftentimes we've been treated as disposable. Essential workers have been lauded as heroes by CEOs and politicians, but when it comes to basic protections like PPE, hazard pay, or a say in how to keep ourselves and our coworkers safe on the job, workers have been pushed to the side too often. But on Election Day last November, working people rose up despite the pandemic and voted for a workers' first agenda. We voted for a workers' first agenda when we elected Joe Biden as president, the most pro-union president we've had in generations. We voted for putting workers first when we sent a pro-union majority to the United States Senate and demoted Mitch McConnell. And we voted for a workers' first agenda when we maintained a pro-union majority in the U.S. House and Nancy Pelosi as Speaker. The hallmark of that agenda is the PRO Act and public sector labor law reform. We must finally allow working people the freedom to join a union fairly and freely without interference or intimidation from their boss, because we know that strong unions mean strong communities, a thriving middle class, and a more resilient democracy. And now it's up to the United States Senate to pass the PRO Act and send it to President Biden's desk, since the U.S. House has now passed the bill twice. And the national labor movement is mobilizing from coast to coast and fighting to make labor law reform a reality. Now, just in the last few months, we've seen more incredibly exciting proposals from the Biden administration that have the power to transform our economy, our communities, and our future. The American Jobs Plan and the American Families Plan, to name a few. But another key part of the Workers' First agenda over the last year has always been focused on beating the virus, keeping essential workers safe, rebuilding our economy, and providing the necessary relief for states, schools, and local governments. And in March, because of what working people did in November with our votes and our election victories, Congress sent the American Rescue Plan to President Biden's desk, where he signed it. Today, that is our focus, taking a deep dive into this complex but historic legislation as it is being implemented and becoming real for workers in our communities. Now, this $1.9 trillion package was union made with working people at its core. And just look at a few of the things that are in it, from payroll protection to survival checks, to support for state and local governments, to resources for schools, to relief for multi-employer pensions, to 100% COBRA subsidy, and more. Now, this package is predicted to cut child poverty in half. And studies show that the GDP is expected to grow by 3.8% this year because of its transformational size and scope. Now, I am so excited to dive into today's conversation. We are about to hear from an incredible heavy hitter panel of national experts, leaders, and worker advocates from across sectors to share what this historic relief package means to working people and the labor movement in Oregon and across the country. We are so fortunate to have policy experts with us today from AFSCME, the American Federation of State, County, Municipal Employees, UFCW, the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, AFT, the American Federation of Teachers, and the National AFL-CIO to share their perspectives on this game-changing relief and stimulus package. I'll ask each panelist to give just a brief introduction of yourself at the beginning of your presentation. And first, it is my pleasure to introduce Rachel Lyons with the United Food and Commercial Workers. Thanks so much for joining. Welcome, Rachel.
Hi there. Thanks, Graham, so much. This is just a delight to be here. Hi, I'm Rachel Lyons, Legislative Director for the United Food and Commercial Workers. We are 1.3 million workers across the country, over 21,000 workers in Oregon, in grocery, meat packing, healthcare, and the emerging cannabis industry. And because of that list of that list of industries, we're on the front lines. And so our story and what we wanted and looked at in the American Rescue Plan is the story of frontline essential workers. Unfortunately, UFCW has seen a great deal of impact. We have lost over 400 members to COVID in the stores. So we look at this plan and we look for what can help those frontline workers continue to put groceries on the shelves, keep those shelves stocked, your food coming to you, and your pharmacies working. So I'm gonna, slides, are we looking?
Forthcoming.
Okay,
Yeah.
I will assume they're coming. So there are a bunch of areas that we'll all talk to. We've divided it up very efficiently. So I won't go into all of these, but this is how we talk about it in our membership, and this is how it impacts our frontline workers. And these are some of the key moments that we talk about. So relief payments, vaccine access, childcare, worker safety, and retirement. Next slide. So I'm going to drill down a little into two of the key things that our workers are most excited about. One is the cash relief payments. You should have already seen this in your paycheck, $1,400 for individuals making less than $75,000. This money was so significant for our retail workers, frontline workers who had been on the ground this entire time. In addition, there is a significant amount of money for support for worker training and enforcement, health and safety money for high-risk workers in sectors such as meat processing and healthcare. And I'm sure folks have seen the stories of the impact, especially in the meat processing sector in terms of COVID running through the factories and there not being enough enforcement or protections for workers. So this is welcome money, both in terms of training, but really in terms of enforcement, getting those inspectors back into the plants to make sure our workers are safe. So cash relief payments and health and safety. Also want to stress that there's a big bit of funding, a 15% increase in SNAP benefits, that's food stamps. That's more money for states to handle the higher than normal volume that's come out of the pandemic. And for our grocery store workers, that's ours. And that has helped cover the increased expenses that they've incurred as frontline workers. Next slide. I want to drill down a little bit into one key part of the state and local funds, and I know my colleagues will talk a little bit more about that, which is hazard or premium pay. One of the 4 uses that you can use that states can use their state and local funds for is to use it for hazard pay or premium pay for essential workers. The number one thing we have heard from grocery store and meat processing workers this whole time is they are proud to serve their communities, but could we have a little, they've also incurred a huge extra cost in terms of childcare expenses, additional healthcare, and in PPE, as well as often being the only person who kept their job during some parts of the pandemic. So this we heard as the number one thing from our members, and we're delighted that it's one of the uses. And now we have to get it, right? We have to work with the states. It's up to the states to decide how to spend their money. And we're hoping that every state decides to acknowledge the sacrifice that essential frontline workers put on and use some of that money for hazard pay. Next slide. And then the last thing that I'm going to cover is some of the childcare monies and supports. There are 3 different ways that this plan supports children and parents. And someone will talk a little bit about the direct assistance, the child tax credit, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the child care tax monies. There are 2 ways that the American Rescue Plan supports child care. One, well, actually, there are technically 3 ways. One is that there's money to expand for states to use what they already have to expand to essential workers. So they can designate some of their child care and development block grant money to expand eligibility. In some cases, essential workers weren't eligible for child care assistance because they didn't meet thresholds, and the states can waive that. The other is this blanket increase, expands the child care tax credit for everybody. And this is, it says here on the slide, covers half of child care for up to $4,000 for one child, up to $8,000. That is nearly doubling the credit. There is also money in the American Rescue Plan for childcare workers themselves to buy PPE and to provide better training and cleaning for the centers themselves. So in this way, we're supporting childcare from all sides, which helps our workers who have been working this whole time and need the support of their fellow essential workers to support them. So I just wanted to do that quickly. Those are some of the key points, and I'll turn it back to you, Graham. Is that who I do?
Thanks so much, Rachel. Really appreciate that presentation, and we'll have time for some question and answers at the end. But next up, I wanted to welcome Ed Muir with AFT. Welcome, Ed. Thanks so much for joining.
Thank you for having me. And for and it's always great to be with people in Oregon. I work for the Oregon School Employee Association, for AFT Oregon, for the Oregon Nurses Association, and the Oregon Federation of Nurses and Health Professionals. And that's that's something that generally makes me very happy to do. And I've got some slides as well. I'm going to focus on a few different pieces of this very big puzzle. And I want to start by kind of putting it in context for what this is. This is a rescue plan. And to think of, and it's important, I think, to think about, if you go to the next slide, as a rescue plan. We've lost 586,000 lives to this pandemic. We have people who, we don't know how many people are going to be having long-term continuation of their COVID symptoms going forward. Our economy is 9 million jobs short of where it was pre-pandemic. And all of these things have hit our most vulnerable communities harder than our more affluent communities. It's tilted in the impacts. And for our union, in the industries in which we work, we've lost 1.3 million jobs across public education. We've lost 100,000 jobs across the country in hospitals. And at the start of this, we were in a fragile economic recovery. And we came into the new year looking at the potential for a double dip recession that was going to be really very hard for us, and make 9 million jobs was going to go and become an even bigger job loss. If you go to the next slide. And the rescue plan is designed to put a floor under that, and designed to help people who have been hit the hardest, and designed to help move us forward and deal with the pandemic and shore up the public services that have been disinvested in, and replace the jobs that we've lost. And it's a remarkable piece of legislation. And this is a graphic from the Center for American Progress that looks at the different elements of what's in the rescue plan. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the $350 billion for state and local aid in particular, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the $178 billion for schools. But the whole package is just amazing, and something that's very important to help us move forward out of what has been a very dark circumstance. And if you go to the next slide, please. All right, I'm going to start with K-12 education. There's $126 billion in the plan for K-12 education. Oregon gets $1.1 billion of it. And school districts can use this for anything that they use federal funds for. It's a very wide open, broad ranging use of funds. And there are some expectations that portions of the money are going to be used to help students who've been left behind in the pandemic. The term for this that people use all the time that I don't like very much is learning loss. But people who have had a hard time getting their education moving forward in the pandemic, there are set-asides to help with that. There are programs that are designed to direct funding to support low-income students, to give summer supports. And there is an allowable use that you can definitely use this money to upgrade your ventilation systems and take the repairs and the steps that you need to make sure that COVID transmission is a thing that you're reducing as much as possible in your schools. And you can get PPE, you can support for cleaning. There's mental health services for children. The allowable uses are many and good. And if you go to the next slide, please. Higher ed is a little bit different. There's $40 billion for colleges in this. There is $36 billion that is going to go to public and nonprofit institutions, including $400 million of that that's flowing into Oregon. There's additional money for historically Black colleges, tribal colleges, and minority serving institutions. For-profit colleges actually get some money that will go to their students for financial aid. The piece about this is that half of the money has to go to emergency financial aid for directly to students. So that money is designed to help students pay their tuition and be in the school. The other half goes to the institution itself and can be used to replace lost revenue or to otherwise deal with pandemic impacts. And so one of the things about having my mic on is you get to hear apparently when I get an email. Sorry about that, guys. This is on top of prior investments in higher education that were made in previous relief bills and is a very good and very welcome thing. And if you could go to the next slide. Then there's $350 billion that's designed to help states, cities, towns, and tribal government deal with the pandemic. And some of that money can be used to replace revenue loss. If your revenues have not grown by at least 4% a year through the course of the pandemic, you can fill up to that line with that money. You can use the money to directly address pandemic-related public health needs. You can use the money to provide educational or other services to communities that are at risk. And you can use that money for premium pay. You can also use it for water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. So there's a bunch of uses for this money. And within that, the federal government is not being particularly prescriptive about how the money gets used. They're offering guidance, they're offering rules. A lot of those rules basically say, you have to use this for this broad purpose. Here are some examples of how to use it. If you go to the next slide, please. And so, for example, for the healthcare workers that AFT represents, there's a lot of focus on how this money can be used for public health expenditures. And it can go to hospitals, it can go to a variety of healthcare facilities. It can be used to increase COVID treatment capacity. It can be used for testing. It can be used for COVID monitoring and other public health expenses. It can be used to help improve even the ventilation of the healthcare system. And it can be used to pay for community health workers and public benefit navigators. So there's a bunch of allowable uses that can help with healthcare in that $350 billion, in addition to the money that can be used to shore up state public services and prevent budget cuts and restore budget cuts in the public sector. And then if you could go to the next slide. And then the last thing that you can use the money for, and all of these things are things you should use the money for, is premium pay. And you've already heard about the importance of this program. We think that it's something that states should be doing. They issued rules last week that I think it's good to touch on. Generally speaking, the rules say that the work needs to be done in person to qualify for premium pay, and that's the biggest kind of stricture in it. They want you to prioritize providing pay retrospectively for work that is already done. They want you to prioritize pay for lower income workers. There is no salary cap in the pay, but if you're providing premium pay that's over 150% of the average annual wage for the place where that worker lives, you have to provide a written justification for why that person's work was essential good and deserves the premium pay. And that, I think, is the last slide I'm going to do talking about this today. I look forward to questions.
Thanks so much, Ed. Really appreciate you joining. Look forward to the questions as well. Next up, we have Dahlia Thornton with AFSCME. Welcome, Dahlia. Thanks so much for joining.
Absolutely. Thank you, Graham. And thank you all for being here today and listening to us talk about the broad strokes of the American Rescue Plan. I want to do a little digging today into what this all means for Oregon and Oregon public service workers. We can get the PowerPoint up. I'll keep on blazing forward, and then we'll talk a little bit more. So what does this all mean? To begin, let's talk about what the American Rescue Plan does. It ensures that state and local governments have the money that they need to pay for public services, full stop. So when Congress wrote this law, they recognized the critical work that members of our affiliates do every day. Like the rest of the country, Oregon needed help to get past the threats to our health, jobs, and financial security. Since the pandemic began, we've collectively lost more than 1.2 million government jobs, including almost 25,000 jobs in Oregon alone. The American Rescue Plan includes unrestricted aid to states and local governments, which you've heard about today, to get them through the next few years. So this isn't just to plug a hole this year. This actually goes for several years. So that's a huge benefit of the American Rescue Plan. That aid is intended to help states and local governments cover the cost of COVID expenses and replace lost revenue. The state of Oregon was slated to receive about more than $2.6 billion, and these were some of the early estimates. They now have official numbers. As Ed pointed out, the Treasury guidance came out early last week, and that has the exact numbers. So you can certainly get the exact numbers. But the $2.6 billion is just for the state. So for comparison, in 2020, total revenues for the state of Oregon were $28.8 billion. So that $2.6 billion was like the state just got a 9% lump sum bonus all at one time. So there's also another $1.5 billion that's going to cities and counties like the city of Portland, which is going to get about $217 million. On top of the money that's going to, the flexible money that's going to state and local government, other Oregon employers will see substantial relief from the American Rescue Plan as well. So I know that Ed touched on this a bit, that colleges and universities will get direct aid for themselves and their students. For example, OHSU is estimated to get about $2.87 million. K-12 will get more than $1 billion total in the state of Oregon, and that's to help reopen schools safely for in-person instruction. On average, that ends up being about $1,800 per student. The law also includes targeted help for other public services in Oregon, such as $330 million to support public transit in the Portland metro area, $2.9 million for Oregon public libraries. So there is a lot in this law, and it's intended really to help the state stand back up again, really to get back up on their feet. Now, we've been clear since this began that if we don't control the health crisis, we cannot control the economic crisis. This law provides more money to support and enhance Oregon's efforts to protect your health and get the pandemic under control by opening more vaccine sites and expanding testing. Next slide, please. It's also important to think about what this means to Oregon families and workers. The families of 780,000 Oregon children will receive an extra child tax credit of up to $1,600 in 2021, lifting 40,000 of those children out of poverty. There's also help for childcare through changes to the dependent care tax credit and dependent care FSAs. Now, as many of you know, and I know Rachel touched on this earlier, the American Rescue Plan offers stimulus checks of $1,400 per person, up to $80,000 a year if you're single, and $150,000 a year if you're married. Now, that's in addition to the $600 stimulus checks that folks got in January. And to buy time for the recovery to kick in, the American Rescue Plan also provided targeted relief for those who were hurting the most. Next slide, please. And next slide. All right. So something that all the unions here today and the AFL fought very hard for generally was ensuring that if you lost your job, you weren't out of options for healthcare. I know that I believe we're going to talk about COBRA here shortly, but for those of you, for those workers who lost their jobs, the law includes fully paid for COBRA insurance coverage. So this lets you keep the health benefits that you had at the job that you lost through September. Another key element of this law was ensuring that the unemployed not only had health care, but also got a check to get them through this crisis. The American Rescue Plan offers unemployment benefits to people who don't regularly qualify, like gig workers and other self-employed people. For all workers receiving unemployment benefits through the beginning of September, it gives them an additional $300 per week on top of their regular unemployment benefit. Now, this is because the regular benefit otherwise only covers up to about half of your lost wages and is capped at $673 in Oregon. There's also more help to make sure that families and children have enough to eat through programs like the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. I urge you to take a deeper look at what's in this new law and the new Treasury guidance again that was issued last week, to talk to your affiliates about the ways in which this law will affect the work that you do every day. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Dahlia. Really appreciate your presentation. And next up, we have Kelly Ross with the AFL-CIO. Welcome, Kelly. Thanks so much for joining. I think you're on mute, brother. There we go.
Thank you, Graham. I'm really glad to be here. I'm always glad to speak to the Oregon AFL-CIO. My family is from Salem and Newburgh and Newport, so I'm an Oregonian at heart, even though I grew up in California. I am the policy director at the AFL-CIO, and I just want to focus on a few aspects of the ARP, the American Rescue Plan, that I think are pretty extraordinary. We've already covered a number of extraordinary provisions. Here are a few more. Next slide. So I want to talk about the unemployment benefits that Dahlia just touched on, the pension relief, healthcare subsidies, and transportation. Next. So the extension of the UI program was actually already in the law that was passed last March, the CARES Act. This was just an extension, but I just want to emphasize how extraordinary this program was. It really was a success story of our response to the pandemic. There's three aspects to it. One was expanding eligibility to people who don't usually get UI, as Dahlia mentioned. Another was the originally a $600 increase in benefits, and then also extended benefits for people who use up their 6 months, and they get another 13 weeks. That was an extraordinary successful program, along with the direct payments last year. It kept us from falling off a cliff, really. And this extension in the American Rescue Plan takes us through September 6th. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. So just I want to raise a few issues around the UI program. Like I said, it's expiring soon, and so there's lots of debate about this. There is a narrative forming pushed by employers that we don't have enough workers and inflation is getting out of control and the economy is overheating. Obviously, that's not true. As Ed Muir pointed out earlier, we're still 9 million jobs short. People need to focus on that. We don't have an inflation problem. If workers start to earn higher wages, that's a good thing, not a bad thing. But you see 20 states as of today are saying that they are going to discontinue this incredibly successful program. That's a real problem. There's a debate going on in Washington, D.C. about whether the Labor Department has the power to stop them from doing that. There's an argument that they do. Certainly they have a pot of money to give to states for administering the unemployment program that they can use to keep states from doing this. But anyway, going forward, we're going to have to extend this program past September 6th. And there's a continuing need, I think, to fix the UI system, because one thing that the pandemic has shown is that there are lots of holes, lots of cracks that this temporary program is filled in, but need to be fixed on a permanent basis. So next slide, please. There's a couple of just really extraordinary things here. The pension relief provisions, $86 billion to prevent workers from having their benefits cuts. The intention is that this will protect benefits for 30 years. We'll see if that actually is enough money, but that's the intention. No repayment requirements. We were in a bad place because of the way multi-employer pension plans work. If you don't put enough hours into it, the plans are jeopardized. This really has helped stabilize the whole multi-employer pension system and the PBGC, and it's extraordinary that we were able to accomplish this. I think we really need to stop and appreciate the effort that went into this. It's an extraordinary thing. Next slide, please. And the COBRA subsidy, likewise, extraordinary. When we started this campaign really last year with the HEROES Act, people said you'll never get that, you'll never get the pension relief, and we did. And without really any ifs, ands, or buts. No strings attached. I mean, these are really good, incredible accomplishments. 100% of healthcare premiums for people who are COBRA eligible when they lose their job or have their hours reduced, and they don't have to pay premiums for 6 months. There was a provision like this back in 2009 in the Great Recession, but it wasn't very effective because it didn't really cover the entire cost of the premiums. This time we fought and fought. We lost a few battles, but in the end we won the war, and we got the full 100% COBRA subsidies, which is going to help a lot of people maintain their employer-provided health coverage. And then next slide. And then on the transportation front, again, some really extraordinary provisions, $30 billion for public transit agencies and their frontline workers, a continuation of a program that keeps workers in the airline industry on the job and not laid off, and similar money for aviation manufacturers. I think that's intended to go to Boeing, basically. Along with money, $1.7 billion for Amtrak to bring back furloughed workers and restore some long-distance routes. So in the end, just a long list of very extraordinary programs that are in this bill that people don't, none of the people are aware of, that I think that we really need to celebrate them in terms of victories for the labor movement. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Kelly, Dahlia, Ed, and Rachel, for your incredibly helpful and timely presentations. I believe we'll now open up the floor for some Q&A. Clearly, overall, this plan is such an amazing accomplishment, and given the numerous pro-worker provisions in it, it's clearly a package that the national labor movement made happen. So, question for Kelly. How would you explain how we got such a good result with the package of this, given what we've just covered?
I highlight two things. One is that people watching us now may have been part of the campaign that started last May around the HEROES Act. The labor movement got together. We agreed on what our priorities were. We decided that we were going to push for this package and make it a priority for the labor movement, and we did that for all of last year. And then at the end of the year, elections matter. Elections make a difference. Having President Biden in office is a game changer. And the effort that we put into electing 2 senators in Georgia in December, and people watching us now may have been part of that effort because we were making phone calls from all around the country. I was making phone calls into Georgia to make sure that we got the Democrats won those 2 seats. That makes a difference. The combination of a year of grassroots mobilization and the political effort to get the right people in office pays off. It's worth it.
Great. Thanks so much. And here. So now I've got a couple questions for Dahlia from Ask Me. So first, something on many minds, I'm sure, is when is this money coming? So hoping you can help us with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I forgot to introduce myself and tell you that I'm the Director of Research and Collective Bargaining out of our national union, and that we represent 30,000 workers in Oregon. So I wanted to make sure I got that in. So, but how do we get this money? When is this coming? So that was the big question that people had. The Treasury guidance that came out last week really laid that out quite well. So states will have to put in, they're going to have to show the need for the money. And once they put in the need for that money, there is a form on the Treasury Department website. And it is pretty clear that within about 5 days, that money can be deposited. So it is a very quick turnaround in terms of how quick that money can come back or get to the states and to local governments. So it is very quick now that the form is on the Treasury website, and they are turning around very quickly.
Great. And follow-up question to that, curious about who decides how state and local governments will use this money. I think that's a really important question for listeners.
Well, I'm in the Department of Research and Collective Bargaining, so I say we decide. We've got to bargain for this, right? So, Ed was really clear and laid out the 4 permissible uses, both that were in the law and that were expanded on in the Treasury guidance. But ultimately, we've got to make ourselves a priority. And that is really the key here. We have to make ourselves a priority with the essential pay. We've got to make a claim for that money. That money is going to states. We've got to get to the bargaining table. We have to push for that. Ultimately, it will be the decision makers, the same ones that make the decisions every time we bargain. And so we've got to make the case. I think Rachel makes a very strong case for essential workers, so we've got to get to the table there. So the folks we always bargain with are the same ones that are going to be making these decisions and pushing these things through. So we have got to bargain this. So ultimately, it's us. We're the ones who are going to make this decision.
Amen. So this next question is for Ed from AFT. Tell us a little bit about some of the issues that AFT affiliates in Oregon and across the country are seeing with employers about putting these funds to work.
So this is a very similar answer to Dahlia's answer. There is a belief in school business officials and the people who are more concerned about our balance sheet and how the balance sheet looks, that this is money that we're only going to get one time, and therefore we should only use it in a certain way. And that certain way almost never, if you put on that mindset, involves hiring staff. It involves trying to find ways to use it to pay down debt or to do projects that are one-time uses of money or buy textbooks. And this is a rescue plan, and the money should be used for the rescue. And making the case that the money should be used to be put into the community for services the community needs, and that it should be used to restore the capacity of the school district or the other agency to provide the services that it's supposed to provide, I think is a really important case that we have to make.
Great. Thanks so much, Ed. One more question for you, Kelly. How would you suggest we push back on this pervasive narrative that overly generous unemployment insurance is causing the labor shortage crisis?
Well, it's clearly not, first of all. A lot of economists looked at this question last year when the increase was $600, and they really determined conclusively that was not what it was. It wasn't changing the behavior of workers, and now it's $300, so even less. But more importantly, if you just look at what you would expect to see if there were a true labor shortage, we're down 9 million jobs, right? So that's the first point. If you really had a labor shortage, you'd be seeing wages going up. You'd be seeing workers working longer hours. That's really not happening. In a couple of sectors, there you could see some wages going up, but across the board, it's really not happening. And what you do see in some places is childcare scarcity, and the weakness of our childcare infrastructure is making it difficult for some people to go back to work. But the economic metrics don't show that we have a labor shortage or definitely not an overheating of the economy, just the opposite. We need to focus. We are still in a big hole. And I just recall going back to Ed Muir's presentation, this has been a very deep economic crisis, and we're not out of it yet. And we can't start pretending that we are, because that's how structural inequities get built into the system. We need to keep working so that wages start rising.
Thanks so much, Kelly. And Rachel, our last question is for you. So the burdens of this pandemic have fallen squarely on the shoulders of working people, such as UFCW members, of course. The American Rescue Plan is historic and necessary, but it isn't sufficient. So what lessons can we learn from the success of this groundbreaking legislation, and what do you see as the next steps towards a more just recovery?
So we need to walk and chew gum at the same time, right? This pandemic is not over, and we still need safety standards, and we still need to implement this rescue plan, right? One among the things we need the Department of Labor to issue an OSHA temporary standard that tells us what is safe in every workplace for a pandemic like this. And that still hasn't come out yet. And yet at the same time, unfortunately, CDC has issued guidance that says we're going to stop wearing masks. So we need our federal government to be united and a little more clear about what's going to keep workers safe. So we've got some safety concerns. So that's one. Everyone needs to get vaccinated. We need to work on getting that message out there. And then there are two other plans, and the next step is a just recovery, is making sure that we build back better. to use a phrase that someone else has been using pretty often these days. There's something called the American Jobs Plan, which will build roads and bridges and includes the PRO Act, this bill that we have all would help labor balance the playing field for labor so that we can organize and give workers a voice on the job. And there's something called the American Families Plan, which would make some of these child care tax credits that I've been talking about and child credits permanent. Understanding one of the things that this pandemic has shown is how connected we all are and how much we need our essential workers to be able to work, and they need other workers and they need childcare supports. They need paid time off, paid sick days, and paid family leave. So we've got, there are plans come from the administration which address both of these things. They're big, they're bold, they're ambitious. And we need to talk to Congress and say, look, we need to keep going. We need that this recovery is not done until we all recover, until there's something everyone feels supported. And so that's really one of the things, is to continue to address this pandemic. It's not done, make sure people are safe. And then let's think boldly about an economy that really supports everybody and that is good for workers. And we think that's one that has strong unions in it. And so we will be fighting for that.
Fantastic. Thanks, Rachel. And again, I just want to thank our incredible panelists on behalf of the Oregon labor movement. We're so grateful for your leadership and your expertise and appreciate all you do for America's workers. So to learn more about the American Rescue Plan and what it means for your members and workers in Oregon and across the country, please visit the Oregon AFL-CIO's website at the link on your screen, which is www.oraflcio.org/ARPA. for resources we've compiled from national unions, the AFL-CIO partners, and other critical information. One other exciting campaign I'd like to highlight and piggyback off of some of the presentations you've heard is the Oregon Essential Worker Pay Campaign. As you've heard, Oregon will be receiving billions of dollars from this historic piece of legislation, specifically for assistance to those hardest hit by the pandemic. And that includes premium pay or hazard pay for essential workers. Unfortunately, as Oregon lawmakers are deciding how to use those funds currently, there is a current push to reserve disproportionate amounts of those one-time federal dollars and put them into district-by-district projects instead of stimulating the economy on the whole and investing in the workers that have gotten us through the pandemic at great personal risk. So that's why worker advocates launched a Pay Essential Workers campaign several months ago and have been advocating constantly for this to be prioritized by legislative leadership. So on your screen, you'll see the link as well, but please go to www.payessentialworkers.org to take action. Email and call your state legislators and tell them that essential and frontline workers deserve more, and they deserve to be paid for keeping us safe, fed, clean, and healthy during such a difficult period in our history. Now, don't wait, email, call now. Our legislative leaders are literally deciding how to use this federal influx in resources as we speak. So we appreciate the leadership of Oregon's Democratic Congressional Delegation for helping to make this landmark legislation you've learned more about today a reality. And the Oregon labor movement is looking forward to engaging in the implementation of the American Rescue Plan Act and ensuring that we carry out its goals in a worker-centered, pro-public service and schools manner. Now's the time to take big, aggressive action to ensure that we beat the virus, we prioritize protecting essential workers on the job, and we rebuild our economy with a workers first approach. There is nothing that can stop a united labor movement, as we saw with this groundbreaking legislation. And I am so proud of our affiliates and partners for the incredible work that you've done and we've done to hold the line against corporate greed and the austerity narrative during such a dark time for our nation. We're looking forward to continuing our fight to pass the PRO Act and public sector labor law reform, as you've heard about, the American Jobs Plan and American Families Plan, as you've also heard about, and working alongside Oregon's pro-union Democratic delegation to get it all done. Thank you all for joining us today, and we'll be in touch on additional ways that you can engage in these fights for justice in the workplace. Thanks again.